Qatari and Egyptian mediators have proposed a new formula to end the war in Gaza. This as per a BBC report which has cited a senior Palestinian official familiar with the negotiations. The proposal looks at a lasting truce between 5 and 7 years, the release of all Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails, a formal end to the war and a complete Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. This new proposal comes after Hamas rejected Israel's latest proposal, which included demand for the Palestinian group to disarm for a 6-week truce. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called on Russia to give a clear answer to his 30-day ceasefire proposal. He has said that Ukraine stands by its proposal for an end to attacks on civilian targets and is ready for any form of discussion to achieve it. However, Russian President Vladimir Putin has said Russia will analyze the idea, but he has questioned how it would work as he has accused Ukraine of using civilian buildings such as restaurants and universities for military purposes. Amid growing calls to fire U.S. Defense Secretary over his reported use of messaging app Signal to discuss strikes on Yemen with his wife and others, U.S. President Donald Trump has bad-peaked Hegseth and dismissed such calls, saying the Defense Secretary is doing a great job. Trump said that the reports about Hegseth's Signal use and allegations of dysfunction at the Pentagon were just fake news. Trump's comments came even as Republican Representative Don Bacon of Nebraska supported calls for Hegseth's removal. Bacon is the chair of a House Armed Services Subcommittee. Israel's internal security chief Ronen Bar has accused Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of demanding personal loyalty and ordering him to spy on anti-government protesters. The Shin Bet chief wrote it was clear that in the event of a potential constitutional crisis, Netanyahu expected Bar to obey him and not the courts. The security agency boss also said Netanyahu told him on more than one occasion that he expected the Shin Bet to take action against Israelis involved in anti-government protests. Bar also said Netanyahu had sought his help to delay testifying in an ongoing corruption trial against him. Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich is facing backlash for his comment that rescuing hostages from Gaza is not the most important thing. Smotrich made the comment while speaking to Radio Galilee. In his remarks, the Israeli Finance Minister put wiping out Hamas above rescuing remaining hostages from Gaza. The statement immediately drew backlash from the family of hostages, human rights groups as well as members of the ruling coalition. Hostages and Families Forums called Smotrich's remarks a shameful betrayal, accusing the Israeli government of deliberately driving up and giving up the remaining hostages. Protests continue to mount against the Israeli Prime Minister. In capital Tel Aviv, hundreds of demonstrators, including former Israeli observer, soldiers joined relatives of Matan Angrest, an Israeli soldier being held in Gaza for a protest mimicking the conditions of hostages who are held in Gaza. The demonstrators were covered in red paint symbolizing the blood. They were shackled in chains to call for an end to the war and the release of all hostages. Pope Francis died of a stroke and irreversible heart failure, according to the Vatican, which released the death certificate of the late pontiff. As per the Vatican, the 88-year-old leader of the Roman Catholic Church had fallen into a coma before his death on Monday morning. The funeral is expected to take place between Friday, 25th of April and Sunday, 27th of April, with a group of cardinals scheduled to meet today to potentially finalize the date. The Vatican has confirmed that Cardinal Kevin Farrell will oversee the formal rites, including the certification of death and the placement of the Pope's body in a coffin. Harvard University has filed a lawsuit against Trump administration, arguing the American government overreach violated the university's constitutional rights. The lawsuit filed in federal court in Boston says that the administration is trying to gain control of academic decision-making at Harvard. The lawsuit calls for the freezing of funds and conditions imposed on federal grants to be declared unlawful. Now, Trump had ordered a freeze on $2.2 billion in federal funding after Harvard rejected a litany of demands from the administration. It has also threatened to end the university's tax-exempt status and the ability to enroll international students. US President Donald Trump has ramped up his pressure campaign against Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, calling him a major loser and urging immediate interest rate cuts to prevent a potential economic slowdown. In a post on Truth Social, Trump claimed that inflation in the US is almost non-existent, with costs for energy and other goods declining. He argued that while inflation is low, there is a risk of economic stagnation unless Powell takes action. Trump, who appointed Powell in 2018, has also explored whether he can legally remove the Fed chairman before his term expires in May 2026. Four U.S. lawmakers armed in El Salvador to secure the release of Kilma Abrigo Garcia, who was mistakenly deported from the United States and held at a notorious prison in the country. In a statement, Democrat U.S. representatives accused the Trump administration of running a government-funded campaign kidnapping program. The U.S. government sent Kilma Abrigo Garcia to El Salvador on the 15th of March despite an order protecting him from deportation. The U.S. Supreme Court directed the Trump administration to facilitate Garcia's return after Washington did acknowledge that he was deported due to an administrative error. As Canada nears election day, polls suggest Trudeau's successor Mark Carney could lead the Liberal Party to a fourth consecutive election victory. According to CBS poll tracker, Mark Carney has put Liberals in front with polls showing 43.3% Canadians going their way. Conservative candidate Pierre Poilievre, who was eyeing an election landslide earlier this year, is trailing in the polls. He's close to a 5 percentage point behind his Liberal rival and far behind his new Democrat Party candidate Jagmeet Singh, with 8.2% Canadians backing him. Australians have started early voting for the national election on the 3rd of May, with polls showing the centre-left Labour government holding a narrow lead over the opposition. A record number of people have registered to vote in this election. Ahead of the start of early voting, a new poll showed Labour maintaining its 52% to 48% lead over the Liberal national opposition. A result which mirrors other recent surveys that show the current Albanese government in a winning position ahead of election day. A Delta plane engine caught fire on the tarmac at Orlando International Airport, forcing passengers to evacuate via emergency slides. According to the Federal Aviation Administration, the Delta Airlines flight 1213 bound for Atlanta was pushing back from the gate for departure when one of its engines caught fire. According to Delta, the Airbus plane had 282 passengers and 12 crew members on board, and there were no initial reports of injuries. The engine fire marks the latest aviation scare involving Delta Airlines in recent months. The Poas volcano, one of Costa Rica's most popular tourist attractions, erupted suddenly and blanketed communities across Costa Rica's Central Valley. The Volcanological and Seismological Observatory of Costa Rica confirmed that the strong eruption registered by a spew of column of ash at least 3 kilometers high. The 10-minute eruption expelled ash, toxic gases and incandescent materials, accompanied by heightened seismic activity and sulfur dioxide emissions exceeding 600 tons per day, signaling potential for further disruptions. And India is all set to resume the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra in June after a 5-year hiatus. The pilgrimage, which is organized every year, was postponed in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic and had remained suspended since then. According to the Ministry of External Affairs, the pilgrimage will follow the traditional route via the Lipu Lake Pass in Uttarakhand's Pithoragarh. In January this year, following Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri's visit to Beijing, the two countries had agreed in principle to resume the yatra. The yatra will be conducted by the government of Uttarakhand and the Ministry of External Affairs. Dust particles from asteroid Bennu have made some startling revelations. A study of samples from the asteroid have found chemicals critical for the existence of life. This includes phosphates, ammonia and more than a dozen protein-building amino acids that are present in life forms on Earth, as well as the 5 nucleobase building blocks that make up RNA and DNA. The findings suggest that Bennu's parent body once had underground salty lakes similar to Earth's dry lake beds and may have delivered key ingredients for life to early Earth through asteroid impacts. A new study has warned that climate change could be resulting in higher levels of arsenic in rice, potentially increasing lifetime cancer risk for people in Asian countries by 2050. The study, published in the journal The Lancet Planetary Health, warns that rising temperatures and carbon dioxide levels could change soil chemistry in favor of arsenic, which gets more easily absorbed into rice grains. The study says that South Asian countries are at an increased risk of cancer since rice is the staple food in the region. According to the study, China could see 1.34 crore cases of cancer attributable to arsenic in rice in 2050. Ex-rival Bluesky has introduced blue checks to verified accounts. The move mirrors a feature once deployed at Twitter in an effort to thwart imposters and help users know when account holders were authentic. Billionaire Elon Musk did away with verifying who was behind accounts after he bought Twitter, now called X, in 2022. Bluesky, created by Twitter co-founder Jack Dorsey as a side project in 2019, is eyeing to make 2025 its coming out year. Asian stock markets fought to hold their footing after furious flight from US assets undermined Wall Street and the dollar overnight. Relatively limited losses in Asia sparked talk that funds could be reallocating money to equities in the area, though the impact of tariffs on economic growth remained a major drag. While White House talks on various trade deals are underway or about to start, a question and a quick resolution seemed unlikely. Analysts at JP Morgan noted that the average trade deal took 18 months to negotiate and 45 months to implement. Oil prices climbed in early trade as investors took advantage of the previous day's losses to cover short positions, although concerns persisted over economic headwinds from tariffs and US monetary policy that could dampen fuel demand. Both benchmarks dropped more than 2% on signs of progress in nuclear deal talks between the US and Iran, helping ease supply concerns. US President Donald Trump repeated his criticism of Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell and said the US economy could slow unless interest rates were lowered immediately. His comments about Powell fueled worries about the Fed's independence in setting monetary policy and about the outlook for US assets. Now, the dollar languished near its lowest level in 3 years as Trump's unrelenting attacks on the Federal Reserve chairman further eroded confidence in the US economy. The US currency sagged close to the decade low, reached the previous day against the Swiss franc, and hovered near a 3.5-year trough versus the euro. China also accused Washington of abusing tariffs and warned countries against striking a broader economic deal with the United States at its expense, ratcheting up its rhetoric in a spiraling trade war between the world's two largest economies. A report by the Financial Times suggests US President Donald Trump's administration intends to press India to give online retailers such as Amazon and Walmart full access to its $125 billion e-commerce market. The Financial Times reported it cited industry executives, lobbyists and US government officials in the report, and WION has not verified these claims. Let me clarify that. The report further adds that the US plans to push Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government for a level playing field on e-commerce in wide-ranging talks on a US-India agreement set to also cover sectors from food to cars. For latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.